Over the last couple of weeks, the main thing that I have been focused on this channel is stressing how important it is to focus on altcoins during this time while they just kind of trend in a downtrend, or maybe they just chop to the side. HBAR is one that has been in a downtrend, specifically since going all the way back to July, but also the main thing that I have been saying is focus on the fundamentals. Going all the way back to November of 2024 and how HBAR performed, because again, HBAR did do a 10x from the lows all the way through roughly like January of this year. HBAR did that because of all of the pressure. I've always said that all of these announcements that are so bullish that everyone's saying, oh, well, it doesn't really matter because it doesn't lead to price action at all. It does. It just takes time and it all builds up. Looking at HBAR today, we are definitely in a significant downtrend. We're currently squeezing on this chart as well, and we usually see these break to the upside. I know that it doesn't seem like we were in a downtrend similar to what we are trading in right now back here from like March all the way into October, but we technically were. This was essentially a downtrend that just continued to chop and chop to the downside while the market was kind of frustrating and boring, and we saw Bitcoin continuing to sell off. But then after that, we saw basically a straight upward push on HBAR. And this was 238 days of just sideways and downward pressure, but HBAR was able to do, almost a 10x return during that time. It was an 868% push to the upside. Looking at HBAR today, especially with how the market is looking, I feel as if now is one of the best times to be looking into HBAR. Not just accumulating HBAR, but just watching this thing closely for that big impulsive move. Because again, we are squeezing in this downtrend. And this is at a time where fundamentals around Hedera are heating up more and more. We're starting to see adoption around the ecosystem. We're starting to see growth around the ecosystem. And also specific pieces of Hedera are now getting adopted in a big way, like the Asset Tokenization Studio. And by the title of this video, you probably already know, yes, the tokenization bull run on Hedera is starting. It is heating up. And we are going to address that. But also, we have to address the market real quick because HBAR is looking very good here. It's chopping, it's just squeezing. And this is at a time where Bitcoin dominance is now getting back into my blue zone. I did expect this to happen because I expected Bitcoin itself to also have a much larger bounce in the market and break to a new all-time high. We recently just broke to a new all-time high on Bitcoin, which is also very exciting to see. We're also back to 59% on Bitcoin dominance. So we're getting into this blue zone. And I'm expecting this thing to have a huge sell-off. Essentially, this will be a dead cat bounce. And this is where we start to see alt season really show up. And even when we think about others' dominance, right, or just others themselves, this is altcoins outside of the top 10. We go all the way back to 2020 into 2021. Yes, the 2020 time period was a big sell-off. We see it on the chart. But the main thing that we're looking at here is how big this impulsive move was after we broke to a new all-time high. Because again, the all-time high on this chart was like 53.5 billion. It's kind of interesting to see that value compared to where we are at today. But after the big break to a new all-time high, we saw a big push on this chart of over 823%. Breaking to a new all-time high on the chart today, I still expect to see a pretty big move. I'm going off of 200%. Pretty conservative, I know. Could we see another like 200% push to the upside and say like 400? Yeah, sure, we can. But I'm looking at this and I'm just kind of gauging in a conservative way how high we can go from where we currently are. We're at 321 billion. I expect us to hit about like 1.44 trillion, adding over 1.1 trillion to the altcoin market outside of the top 10, which by the way, yes, includes HBAR. I'm expecting this because I'm looking at where we are at, and I'm looking at where we were at in previous times where, we started to kind of chop against all-time highs and how significant alt season was. I'm still expecting alt season to be very big this time around. And if we're thinking about that, I do think that HBAR is going to have a much larger breakout on this chart above the all-time highs going all the way back to 2021, which are up here around like 57 cents. Price discovery can get very, very exciting, and it can get very volatile very fast. So just be prepared for that. But during this time, I'm looking at the biggest narratives in this space. One of the biggest ones is tokenization. We just hit $19.5 billion, up 14+% in the last 30 days. And I feel as if a lot of people kind of gave up on RWAs. They don't think that it is a huge narrative, but going from the institutional side of the market to the institutional side, it's night and day. Institutions still think that tokenization is one of the biggest things for crypto. They also expect this to be one of the biggest narratives going forward around crypto, along with stablecoins. If we're thinking about that, we are obviously locked in on Hedera, because Hedera has been absolutely killing the tokenization game. The issue here, though, is that if we're looking at the networks and we're looking at all like this whole list, we could see Hedera down here at number 25 with zero value tied back to it. And this is where a lot of people kind of look at it and say, oh, well, Hedera is not really a top dog in the tokenization space if they haven't been paying attention to the ecosystem. But we know that that's a completely different story. Now, also one thing to focus on here is Ethereum, because Ethereum has over $10 billion tied back to it around RWAs. So you might say, well, isn't Ethereum the best option right now to invest in? I don't believe so. And I don't believe so because of this video here. Big shout out to All In Crypto for this. This was from Cebos. This is Greg Bell from the Hedera Foundation. He's highlighting the growing demand for Hedera Hashgraph for institutional grade use cases, including Project Acacia. And really where Hedera outperforms is when institutions require a scalable solution. Scalable is the biggest focus from this statement, because we know Ethereum lacks in scalability. Listen closely to this video clip.
Increasingly, Hedera, powered by its cryptocurrency HBAR, is being included in the conversation with Ethereum and Bitcoin. And really where Hedera outperforms is when institutions require a scalable solution. And so, that's what you have when you see a network that is governed and operated by Fortune 500 companies, from tech giants to asset managers and investment banks. And what we've seen and experienced recently is that issuers like Archax and KAIO have brought and tokenized funds on Hedera from the likes of Aberdeen, from Fidelity International, BlackRock, State Street, Brevan Howard, and many more. What's exciting, though, is not just the tokenization, it's what happens once these assets are now on these new rails. And so what we've seen is firms like Lloyds Bank and Aberdeen are utilizing tokenized money market funds to settle intraday margin exposure for their FX business. Similarly, there's conversations and new structured products that are coming to market where there's combinations of different funds that look more akin to an ETF or a mutual fund that are being composed on blockchain rails. So it's quite an exciting development scene.
Now Hedera has been selected by the state of Wyoming as one of the networks to host FRNT, the first US state-issued stable token. What does this milestone mean for Hedera and the broader tokenization movement?
Yes, so Wyoming has been the first state to issue a stable coin that is backed by the tax-paying power of the state itself. This really is validation for the compliance and risk frameworks that Hedera has put in place, being selected by the state for the issuance of this asset. It's similar to some of the engagements we've seen internationally with the Australian digital dollar, AUDD, as well as participation in the Project Acacia, which is the National Reserve Bank of Australia's stablecoin initiatives.
Now,
So yeah, I mean, listen, when we are thinking about all of these big moves that are happening around Hedera, this is exactly why I keep saying that Hedera is on a completely different playing field than all of these other networks, including, yes, Ethereum. When we think about going forward in time, I really do think that Hedera is going to be a star player in the RWA side of the market. Yes, today, we know there's $0 tied back to Hedera on rwa.xyz, but that's because this is in beta. Hedera is just now getting added to this platform. We know that there's 17 current RWA assets tied back to Hedera. I'm sure that that's going to be well over 20 plus very soon. But just looking at this, right, we have a massive list. And yes, just like he did say, we have a ton of institutional funds tied back to Hedera that have yet to get added. And that's all through Archix, for an example. But, you know, we continue to see more and more adoption around the Hedera tokenization studio. The Hedera Asset Tokenization Studio itself is one thing that I have been very focused on in terms of institutional players and enterprise players tapping into some sort of all-in-one platform so that they can tokenize specific assets. It doesn't even have to be institutional funds. It doesn't have to be, you know, stocks or anything like that. It could be as simple as tokenizing a stablecoin or tokenizing a deposit token, anything. And when we are thinking about that, we already have a few players that are tapped in that are tokenizing specific things, like Diamond Standard. They're tokenizing physical coins and even bars. We have Aberdeen here around tokenized money market funds, tokenization of assets and data integrity from Dovu. This is with typically like carbon credits because Dovu is focused on that. We also have stablecoins. We also have Archix. Again, this could be around tokenized ETFs. It could be stocks. It could be pretty much anything. Then Shinhan Bank and Standard Bank. Well, now we're looking at possibly deposit tokens, stablecoins, or, you know, looking at potentially additional things like joint stablecoin initiatives. We know that the Philippine banks are working on this with Hedera, which we've mentioned as well. Then we also have Joel Bank. We have Red Swan with real estate. I mean, there's a lot of players that are now getting added to this list, and these are just a few. There's definitely a lot more with, for example, like Zonix, for an example, Lloyd's Banking Group. I mean, there's a lot going on around Hedera that a lot of people just do not focus on. And it's kind of crazy, but, you know, when we think about the tokenization boom around some of these networks, yeah, Hedera kind of seems like it's late to the party. However, Hedera has been locked in on tokenization since going all the way back to roughly the end of 2022, right around the time where we started to see big players like BlackRock get interested in tokenization. And today, just like I said, we're starting to see some of the biggest moves happen around Hedera. And it's all through a lot of those original players, like, for example, Aberdeen and Archix and, you know, those players that were initially looking at Hedera for, you know, adoption. So I'm very excited to see rwa.xyz start to track this fully. I know that there could be some API, you know, speed bumps in place that could, you know, hold up things a bit, but I'm watching this so close. I mean, guys, I cannot wait to see the value at it. You guys already know, if you've been watching my videos on HBAR for a while, that I've been tracking this since going back to roughly April of this year. So I'm hoping that by the end of this year, we see some value tied back to Hedera around tokenization, because I do think that that's going to be a game changer. I think that that's going to put a big spotlight on Hedera. And, you know, like I said, the Hedera tokenization bull run started a while ago, but now it's starting to heat up in a big way with names like, for example, Lloyd's Banking Group, with Aberdeen and Archix, but also even with other players like KO, for example, that are utilizing Hedera for tokenized fund offerings, or even Zonix, which just recently tokenized oil and gas contracts. So these things are heating up, and Hedera seems like it's going to be the home for a lot of these big moves. So we'd love to see that. And with that being said, I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys did, definitely leave a like, subscribe, turn notifications on because of more free content. You guys are more than welcome to follow me on Twitter and join the free Discord down in the description below. And with that being said, guys, this has been Nick. Thanks for watching. Peace out.